Cimo.
What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. So today I'm bringing to you my top 5 competitive budget decks for the August 2020 format. Now, this is still a little bit weird, right? I mean, COVID is still going on in full force, and while some locals have slowly started to open up apprehensively, it's not like we have any major tournaments coming up or anything like that. Thing is, the best way to play budget is just to go on an online simulator because you have access to every single card in the game for free. So if you're really looking to play on a budget, that would be my best recommendation. But if you are the player looking to pick up some relatively decent decks for a pretty low price, then this is going to be the video for you. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. Now, I want to preface this video by defining what I consider to be a budget deck. And so for the purposes of that, we're going to be going with a dollar range between $100 and $150 US. That may seem a bit expensive to some of you, but when you look at it relative to the $700, $800, even $900 it costs to play a meta deck, and when you can get something for a fraction of the price that can go toe-to-toe rather well, then it is an absolute bargain. So kicking things off with number 5, I've got GREN MAJU. There is no better feeling than one-shotting your opponent with a big souped-up GREN MAJU from all of those banished cards. GREN MAJU is actually relatively affordable given the fact that most of the cards in the deck have been reprinted numerous times. It's actually a deck that some players flock to if they're wanting to play in a pauper or common-only format because a lot of the cards have been reprinted at the common rarity. But even if you're looking to play stuff like the Dangers to a degree, the Dangers are actually much cheaper than they have been now compared to the past, so it's a great deck to pick up if you're looking to play on a budget. GREN MAJU is a relatively simplistic game plan, but it's proven time and time again to be very powerful because you're just wanting to get as many cards banished as possible, get that GREN MAJU to meteoric heights, and just one-shot your opponent by either hitting a monster that they unfortunately left in attack position, which goes very well with Link monsters, by the way, or just hit them directly in the face if you can manage to clear the rest of their board. The nice thing about GREN MAJU is that it has a relatively unique game plan in that it's really focused on doing its own thing and can kind of ignore a lot of what the opponent does. GREN MAJU doesn't really have too many ways to out it unless you literally remove it from the field. Yeah, there's a couple of cards that can negate it, but those can be pretty easily baited out with the rest of the cards in the deck. It's also nice too because you get to play a bunch of cards that will forcefully banish not only your own cards but your opponent's cards as well, and that can disrupt a ton of their strategies too. While GREN MAJU may not see too much play today, it's still a very fun and very affordable way to take on some of the top tier decks and just one-shot them out of nowhere. So for those reasons, that's why GREN MAJU is my number 5 pick. But coming in at number 4, Dante really does never die because I've got Burning Abyss in my number 4 slot. One of the biggest strengths that Burning Abyss has, aside from the fact that it's a pretty good budget contender, is the fact that it's one of the most recursive decks in the game. If you can get a Dante Seer loop in rotation, it can be very difficult for your opponent to break some of those loops. Another nice thing about Burning Abyss is that the way that the deck functions, it can actually play around a lot of disruption rather well because it can pretty much ignore most of the types of effects that are going to be going after them, since most of the effects of these cards will trigger in the graveyard. Another cool thing about Burning Abyss is that you can play cards such as Karma Cut or PALEOZOIC DINOMISCHUSK to banish your opponent's cards, which if any of those cards do have any sort of graveyard synergies, I'm looking at you, Eldlich, then not only are you going to get the value of banishing those cards and permanently removing them from the game, but you get to discard your own Burning Abyss monsters to get added value off of those effects, trigger those effects, and really kind of put the pressure on your opponent to keep up with you in terms of tempo. While Burning Abyss may not be the strongest control deck in the format, it still puts up a really good fight and can really put a lockdown on your opponent if you know how to pilot the deck properly, and so for those reasons, that's why I've got Burning Abyss as my number 4 pick. Now coming in at number 3, we've got a personal favorite of mine, and that deck is SALAMANGREAT. I'm super happy to tell you guys that SALAMANGREAT is pretty much almost entirely budget at this point because nearly every card in the deck has been reprinted at some point or another, so it really just depends on how far you want to take it. If anything, SALAMANGREAT provides you a great template for building a very standard budget competitive deck, and then you can start to just add more and more pieces as you get some more funds available to purchase those higher end cards. So let's talk about it from a budget perspective though. This deck came originally from a structure deck, so just picking up 3 copies of the structure, it gives you about 75 to 80% of the cards that you need, which is already a boon to anyone looking to play on a budget. But then you also have the other cards that you would want to help supplement the strategy, which come from, again, other structure decks. I'm looking at cards like Lady Debug, Flame Buffalo. Hand traps have pretty much all been reprinted at this point. Ash Blossom, Effect Veiler, all those types of things. So even those are in reach for players who want to play with a lot of hand traps. And if you're playing Salamangreat, which is yet another heavy control deck, you're going to want to play a ton of hand traps to really slow down those super heavy combo decks that your opponent is going to be playing. Just like Burning Abyss, Salamangreat has some incredibly powerful graveyard recursion tools, but it's a little bit more modernized because it's more recent in terms of its release. Now, another thing that's really great about this deck is that while it is natively a control deck and kind of like a pseudo combo deck, since you do a lot of actions to kind of ultimately get on your end boards, it's kind of like a catch-all that really has tools to deal with every particular situation, which is one of the reasons why players love playing the deck. And even from an OTK perspective, there's so many different options you can go with if you're really trying to inflict damage to your opponent. Borrelsword Dragon is one. Transcode Talker specifically is one that this deck can play that is a super cheap option in tandem with a card like Update Jammer. Because the deck is all cybers, it is super easy to just clock your opponent out of nowhere. And one of the most appealing things about Salamangreat is that since the main engine is so condensed, you've got about 12 to 15 slots that you can really kind of fine-tune and hone depending on how the metagame looks, so it's really going to have a good fighting chance in whatever situation you may encounter. While it's definitely fallen from grace from its tier 1 status just a few formats ago, it's still a relatively decent pick, and for the price, you definitely cannot beat it. So for those reasons, that's why I've got Salamangreat as my number 3 pick. But coming in at number 2, we have yet another deck that initially came out in a structure deck, and that is Dinosaur. Dinosaur has become even more affordable as time has gone on, and Dinosaur is a bit of an interesting pick here. Now, Dinosaur has been doing some very incredible things over the past several formats. It's been a deck that a lot of people have looked towards because, similar in like to GREN MAJU, it is able to kind of focus so much on the battle phase, and with a card like Ultimate Conductor TYRANNO being able to just engulf boards all by itself, this is a card you definitely need to look out for. But the deck is so much more than that. I mean, you've got one of the most powerful search monsters in the game being Soul Eating Oviraptor, which pretty much searches your entire deck. You've got Miscellaneous Source for protection. The deck can incorporate cards that can ultimately lead up into a true King of all Calamities, which, if you're going first, is a very cheap way to just win games left and right on turn 1, because this is one of the most oppressive cards in the game, and Dinosaur can make it with relative ease. You can also focus Dinosaur on going second and just completely shattering whatever board your opponent puts up by either slowing them down with hand traps, playing cards like maybe Dark Ruler No More just to pretty much negate everything on their field, and then just running on in with all your big monsters, taking control of the game from there, and you're going to be in a very powerful position. And similar to Salamangreat, Dinosaur is a very good option for just starting things off because it's a deck that you can slowly start to upgrade over time, but the initial deck that you're going to be getting for the budget price is still very powerful enough in itself. Dinosaur is a deck that you definitely cannot underestimate, and when some of the top players are still considering Dinosaur by synergizing it with other strategies, it gives you a good roadmap to be able to build towards something that can be even better than what you have at the budget level. So for those reasons, that's why I have Dinosaur at my number 2 slot. But that's going to bring us to my number 1 competitive budget deck of the August 2020 format, and it's actually a deck that we have never featured in this series. Can you believe that? And that deck is Megalith. Yes, after seeing Megalith's performance not just in the LCS 5 this past weekend, but several other tournaments that took place in that same weekend as well, Megalith was the star of the weekend, and this deck is incredibly cheap. Almost every card in this deck comes at the common rarity, and while you're gonna have to shell out for some expensive cards in the extra deck, such as Borreload Savage Dragon, Crystron Halki Fibrax, Link Cross, it isn't that big of a deal because the main deck for Megalith is so incredibly cheap just because of the way these cards have been printed. And at the time of recording this video, there is the potential for some of these cards that are really expensive at the moment to be reprinted in the 2020 Megatins, which could bring the price of those cards down significantly, probably by half, if not more, which would then make the deck even more affordable than it already is. For people who don't know, Megalith is a ritual monster-based combo deck which can ultimately end on boards that are just as powerful as some of the top-tier combo decks of the format. It's really incredible to see how powerful the advantage generation engine of this deck truly is, but even if you're going second, Megalith can actually play through Disruption rather well, since a lot of the cards either replace themselves or help generate you more advantage in some way or another, and because they have a card like BETHOR that could pop anywhere from like 2 to 9 cards if you get to that point, that's a way for you to just immediately blow out your opponent in so many different circumstances. This deck is actually rather flexible, and while it is a little bit of a glass cannon, this might be the best opportunity to pick up a deck like this just because of how incredibly affordable it really is. A deck that is this powerful at this price point does not come around very often, so if you're looking to play something that's super fun, super cheap, and super competitive, Megalith is definitely the deck for you. Taking second place, well, it should have been first at one of the biggest online tournaments taking place during quarantine, and also taking second and first place at numerous other tournaments as well. Megalith is definitely the rogue pick of the format, but definitely a budget one at that. So for those reasons, I've given Megalith my #1 competitive budget deck slot of the August 2020 format. But guys, that's going to go ahead and wrap up this video. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always. Subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. And if you found this video helpful, consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member. Just by showing your support in any way that you can, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.